Hello, my little spooklings. As requested, I've put together a compilation video of some of my previous stories. Let me know which ones you like, and please be kind, some of my older audio isn't the best, but I suppose you can see how far I've come. Make a Deal with Me. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. She sighed to herself as she gazed down into her drink. How long ago had her life been perfect? A good job, a loving fiancé, a beautiful home, and even better prospects. Her gaze lingered in her reflection, focused on her incredibly dull expression, and she could have sworn she had aged several decades in a matter of days. There was no pain anymore. She accepted her fate readily, and knew deep down this was all part of the bargain she had foolishly made. She wouldn't have ended up in this dive bar with questionable-looking people inside. She knew exactly where she went wrong. Her thoughts went back to that night. She had been furious with that bitch Nicole who had beaten her, again, for the promotion at work she had her eye on. That she had been grinding for months to achieve, and she just waltzes in, gets it. All her hard work had been for nothing. She had to endure the indignity of having to teach her new boss how to do her job. Everything was going wrong. Her boyfriend had left her the day before. It hadn't been the best relationship to begin with, and she wasn't sure she was supposed to be with him. Still, it didn't make it any easier. She found out that he had stolen from her on his way out and left a little present behind for her. Nothing was working anymore. She lifted a cigarette to her lips, the only pleasure she had left, and tried to get her lighter to light. It wouldn't work. "Fucking hell," she groaned, and was about to spit out her only source of happiness when a lit lighter appeared from an elegant hand in front of her. Her gaze followed the arm up and saw an enchanting face. Feline-like eyes gazed down at her. Her red hair curled and framed her face. Whoever she was well dressed. It was difficult to tell how old she was. There was a timeless energy about her. The stranger held the lighter steady while she lit her cigarette. In a blur, the lighter disappeared with a click of the stranger's fingertips. She had to admit she was entranced, completely drawn in by her. The stranger was alluring, and she felt torn between wanting to be her and a desire to be with her. "It seems like you're in a bit of trouble, aren't you?" The stranger's voice was an intoxicating purr. The words took her completely by surprise, and she was rendered speechless. Without invitation, the alluring stranger took a seat beside her. She could not stop looking at those eyes. "I know you are. Or you wouldn't have called me," the stranger winked and continued. "Your life has not gone according to plan, has it? You were with a man when you prefer women. That job you fight for means nothing to you. The friends you call sisters mean nothing to you. And you know they have betrayed you over trivial things. How did you know any of this?" The stranger lifted her elegant shoulders in a shrug, a devilish smirk on her lips, and evaded the question. "What if I could give you everything you truly desired? Money, power, the perfect job, a beautiful girlfriend to call your own, and revenge on those who ever wronged you." She thought about it. Everything she ever longed for was offered to her. Her imagination began to run wild to a point she didn't realize the stranger draped her arm around her. She was pulled close and felt the stranger's breath on the back of her neck. You could have it all, and more if you desired it. What was there to lose? She had nothing else going for her. And how could she resist the alluring stranger? She felt a hand under her chin and turned to see the stranger's red lips, before her gaze lifted to the stranger's eyes. Now she was closer. She could see that the eyes weren't quite feline, but still, their faces were centimeters apart from each other. The stranger leaned in for a kiss. The caress was gentle. For a brief moment, reality hit her, and she saw the stranger for what she truly was, a beast in human form. The fangs were pointed, sharp, and ready. The stranger's smooth skin was coarse to the touch. She could have sworn she heard a rough, monstrous laugh at her realization. The alarm clock blared loudly. She awoke to a star inside a strange apartment. One far more expensive than hers had been. She felt by her side. She was alone, but knew the signs that someone else had been there. She wrapped the sheet around her nude body into a makeshift dress before walking into the expensive kitchen. It alone was bigger than her entire apartment. She blinked and maybe it all could have been a dream. Well, hello, sleepyhead. She turned to see the woman of her dreams, what she desired but never had the courage to go out and find. Wait, who are you? I could have sworn that... She was pulled into a passionate kiss, one that she absolutely did not fight. What's gotten into you? Bad dream? She asked, took her by the hand and led her towards the table while she poured a drink for her. Everything was perfect. There were no remnants of my former life. I was out of the closet and with the woman of my dreams. Perhaps my life before had been the nightmare and this was reality, she thought to herself. I'm sorry, I need to check something. I'll be back in a minute. She stuttered, stood and rushed to the room she had been sleeping. Like a caged beast, she paced around the foot of the bed and finally caught sight of a laptop, one in a far better condition than her old one had been. She opened it, took a guess, and used her typical password. Even in this fancy new world, she used the same damn password. She logged in to check her bank account, and, there was more money in there than her entire family possessed. She could afford to pay all her bills, travel, invest, and do anything she ever wanted to. She could live the life she always wanted. Next, she took the time to check out her social media. It turns out her girlfriend's name was Marie, and they looked happy together in all the pictures. But the memories... they didn't feel right, and they certainly didn't feel genuine. She still wanted them, though. She wanted them more than anything. There was always time to find a way out of the deal. There had to be, and she had time. Marie stood by the door watching for a moment, her hair loose around her shoulders, and her green eyes lingered on her. I was going to wait until we were on holiday. I couldn't resist, though, Marie said, opened up a drawer in the vanity and pulled out a small red velvet covered case. Her heart skipped a beat. Marie went down on one knee to propose to her. The ring slipped on her finger, and they kissed before intimately celebrating. After this, she forgot about the deal, and got used to her new life. The stranger knew she would forget. They always did. When the stranger came to collect, the one she made a deal with hid inside a church while she waited outside. The stranger was surprisingly patient. It wasn't the first time one of her beloveds had decided not to fulfill their part of the bargain. Come now. I get what I want eventually, and it is foolish of you to refuse me, the stranger taunted. If you don't come out, I will slowly remove each thing you had, piece by piece, all until you beg me to claim you. The one she made a deal with did not answer. "We will see how long you manage to hold out for," the stranger said, and then disappeared into a puff of smoke. Instantly, the deal-maker regretted her decision. Why didn't I take the steps I needed to take before making a deal with her? I had the time to do it. I was still young, and who knows? Perhaps I would have been happy out of the closet, she thought to herself. Things began to get worse. Somehow she ended up at the dive bar, pouring her secrets out to the bartender. First, I lost my ring, and naturally my girlfriend was angry with me. It didn't take long before I lost my job and she lost hers. We fought over everything. But there was one thing that finally broke us up, but I can't even remember what it was. I found out she was cheating on me, lying, and that she only wanted me for my money. We lost that beautiful apartment I'd been so proud of. I can't afford to visit the doctor, but I have strange lumps all over my body. I don't know what they are. I guess you could say that I'm sorry, you know? I'm sorry I didn't make it happen on my own. The bartender listened, glanced at his watch, and it wasn't the first time one of the unfortunates had come to visit him. He scrubbed a pitcher and turned to yell some colorful obscenity at two bikers who were randomly fighting in the background. "You gonna be alright? I can help you," he offered. No, I won't be. "I can't help you unless you agree to it. I know things look bad right now, but you're safe here. It's a bit rough, but it's a refuge," he continued, tirelessly cleaning, and watched her with kind eyes. "I don't think you can help me," she added sadly, but looked up at him with a grateful smile. "She can't get in." Wait, how did he know who her adversary was? "If you agree, I can protect you. Otherwise, it needs to run its course." "Help me," she whispered softly. He reached out his hand to touch her shoulder. Immediately she began to feel sleepy. She blinked twice before she fell into a dreamless sleep. And soon her heart came to a stop. And she was free.
The Moonlight, written by Lady Spookaria, narrated by Nordic Vampire and Lady Spookaria. The moonlight was bright in the night sky. It was always the best time to hunt. The lamplight had begun to dim. There was a moment where I paused and watched the various humans as they walked. There was always something where it came to selecting the right victim. The lure of the hunt could never be denied. To be well dressed meant that you could have doors open to you. People always tend to respect their social betters. I saw a young woman walk, and I caught her eye. She blushed, and I knew she was the prey I wanted for the evening. The only time I felt alive was when I was hunting. Her clothing was elegant, and the fabric expensive. She walked with a parasol in her hand. I had to wonder where her companions would be. A young lady of her status should not be walking the streets at night. There was always something so alluring about noble virgin blood. I walked behind her, watching her. and whenever she would get a warning tingle, I would hide in the alleyway. There were many different techniques for me to hunt. Miss, can I help you? I asked. She turned and looked at me, her wide blue eyes frightened. Yet my attire seemed to put her at ease. I could practically hear the blood circulating through her veins.
Sir, please help me, I am lost.
She answered. Oh, this was all too easy. Lost, you say? A shame indeed. Do not worry. I will take you to safety. Do you live in the quarters? Would you like for me to escort you home? She nods. Oh, perfect. She would not make it home. No. I offered her my arm and felt her delicate hand placed on the crook of mine. As I smiled down at her pale cheeks flushed, and I knew this was going to be easier than even I intended. Forgive me, miss. I will take you home now. It is a small walk through this alleyway, I said. A more wily woman would have been cautious and hesitant. Yet she was more than willing. Noble virgins were always the most naive.
He accepted it perfectly. I placed my hand on the crook of his arm and gave it the slightest squeeze. It was important to always give them a sense of power. I shivered, both from the cold and the thrill of the hunt. This part of the city was old, full of winding corridors and alleyways. The perfect place to escort someone secretly or lead them into the unknown. Is it faster? I asked. I hoped he would hear the joy behind my words. The lure of safety. I made sure I gripped his arm and gazed up at him. He nodded to assure me. Good sir, it is dark and I need to get home soon. The pair of us walked down the cobbled streets and I could barely see in the darkness. Instinctively, I pulled back from where I sensed danger and he embraced me. My eyes gazed into his and no doubt he expected his spell to work. This wasn't the first vampire I lured into this alleyway.
I could feel her tense against the stride, turned her face towards me, and in the moonlight I could see her lips part. My hand lifted to cup her cheek, tilted her head gently to one side, and my lips parted to reveal my fangs. Slowly they lowered in desire of that pale neck. I could hear the blood pulsing in her veins. The hunger. I saw the fangs ready to sink into my neck. Behind me, my trembling hand held the wooden stake. Slowly, his mouth began to lower to my neck. This was always the most dangerous part, and I knew it would not take long before the teeth would sink into my neck. I wasted no time. I drew my arm back and thrust the stake into his heart. My gloves protected me from the foul blood that burst out. I stared into his eyes. I did not expect this. I shrank back and tried to stop her hand. I feel the true death begin to claim me.
The sound and smell would last with me forever. I withdrew the stake and watched him fall to the ground. The undead life was slowly leaving his eyes. The blood and rotted gore spilled out as the corpse fell to the ground. I watched it fall back, revealing the skeleton, and soon it turned to dust. I adjusted my parasol, concealed the stake, and continued on my way through the darkness of night. The hunt was still on. No. No. Please, no. She whispered. She watched as her 2 young children kept devouring the living flesh from their father. His fingers continued to twitch, reaching out and scraping along the floor in a feeble attempt to get away. And occasionally, he would let out a slow, agonizing moan of pain. He was so weak. He couldn't fight them, and nor could he hurt them. They tore into his flesh. As she watched, she did not know when the virus would finally claim him and turn him into one of the undead. Every so often he would look at her. She would shake her head and remain as silent as possible, tightly holding the knife in her hands and praying that this nightmare would soon be over. Could she end his suffering? Not without risking herself. Eventually, the life faded from his eyes and he fell back with his final, merciful breath. She hated herself in that moment. She was a coward. She had done nothing. Her eyes closed, body tense, and refused to let out the sob that itched to come out. This long nightmare of pain and blood had to come to an end. It had to. Even if she had to do it herself. Memories of the past filled her mind. How many times she had taken things for granted. She couldn't escape the feelings of anger and frustration. She let out a choked sob. There was a dangerous silence. She froze. Her children had stopped eating their father. Her children, the grotesque zombies, took one more bite each from their father until they realized he was dead and their interest had waned. They liked and preferred their prey to still be alive. They awkwardly got up, their faces coated in blood, with stray entrails hanging from their mouths. She tried not to vomit as she looked at them, and covered her mouth. Her babies, her precious babies, were now monsters. The pair turned to walk towards the door, where more frightening screams could be heard. They were leaving. She peered out, watching and waiting. They were gone. Slowly she opened the door. There was a flickering light overhead. The power had slowly begun to go out as the world fell around her. She looked down at the floor to see the gnawed-on remains of the man she'd married, the man she loved, and watched be devoured like a squirming piece of meat. Her trembling hand held the knife downwards, ready to strike. While most of his body had been torn apart, they left his face intact, a grim reminder of who he was. Guilt and shame filled her. He looked strangely happy and at peace. Those sweet baby blue eyes she fell in love with as a high school sweetheart, with his messy brown hair half covering his face. The good memories all flooded back. She looked down at him with a tender and loving look and reached down. She hoped wherever he was now was better than the living hell she was stuck inside. She knelt beside him, the blood coating her knees as a still warm reminder. She leaned down to kiss those lips she had kissed many times before, and never would again. His eyelids opened, the blue now gone, and a clouded grey replaced them. His mouth opened with a groan. Instantly she knew what she had to do. For a moment she swore there was a look of love in those eyes, a sign of remembrance, a ghost of the man he had been before. She smiled softly. Tears flowed down her cheeks. I love you. I love you so much. I'm so sorry. She plunged the knife into the back of his skull. He died a second time, and she yanked it out. As she looked at him again, she wished she could give him a respectful burial. It was pointless. There was no time. She looked around to make sure her 2 children were not there. They had gone. She lifted the small backpack of supplies she had, put it around her shoulders, and crept out into the darkness of night with her weapon. All silently. She prayed she would not run into either of her children or any other member of the undead. Nor did she know she was being followed. In the basement. I'm pretty sure our basement is haunted or something. Actually, I know it is haunted. My family and I moved into this house about a month ago. The rent was cheap, and we really weren't in a position to say no or to be too picky. The price of housing has jumped considerably in the local area. It is a 4-bedroom place in the not-so-great part of town. It has a basement, a shitty attic, and the owners lived overseas. They left everything to the rental company. It seemed like they didn't want anything to do with the house itself, but for some reason they couldn't part with it. At least, that's what it sounded like. We thought it was fantastic. There is nothing worse than a nosy landlord. My parents would take the master bedroom. My grandparents would take the second largest. And my 2 siblings took the other bedrooms. I got the basement, and I was excited for it at first. It was huge, and I would have it all to myself. I was beginning to unpack when I heard a bump. I stopped and looked around. Nothing. I figured it was one of my siblings playing some kind of prank on me. I rolled my eyes, smiled to myself, and began to place my books on the bookshelf. My phone rang. I got up and looked at the number. Private number. So I ignored it, dropped it back on the bed, and turned around. Pick up. Pick up. Pick up. I thought I heard someone talking. Dana? I asked in hopes of hearing my sister's voice. I saw a shadow in the corner of the room. Child size. About her height. There was no one else it could have been. I sighed irritably. Dana, you're getting too old to play those games. I need to get unpacked. Why don't you come and help me? She didn't say anything. My normally incredibly chatty sister was silent. It was extremely strange. Dana, stop being a weirdo and get away from the corner. No one has time for this bullshit. I'm not in the corner. Dana's voice called out from the bottom of the stairs, her green eyes wide in confusion, a glass of orange juice in either of her hands. If she was here, then who was in the corner? I looked back towards the corner and the shadow was gone. Maybe it was my imagination playing tricks on me. I smiled at Dana and gestured with her hand for her to come and sit with me. I happily accepted the juice and sipped the liquid. Still, I could have sworn that I saw something. But maybe it was because the house was new and I was still getting used to it. We sat on the bed and chatted about a few things before the topic came back to the house. What do you think of the house? She fidgeted on the spot. I like it. This room is really creepy though. Are you sure you're gonna sleep in here? In all honesty, after the shadow person in the corner, I didn't want to. Not that I was going to tell her that. Yeah, it's a nice room. Look at how big it is. Was all she said. Normally she hung around a lot, but now it was strange for her. There were so many times when I had to tell her to leave me alone to give me some space. It was as though she didn't want to be here. She went up the stairs and I was left alone in the room. The basement door was closed. And I felt so alone down here. And normally, I like being alone. This was a completely different feeling. The day had turned to night. I had a nagging feeling that I was being watched. I also didn't want to leave my room. I had a weird dream, a nightmare. I can't remember it. Every night I become more and more tired. I didn't want to leave my bed. I stopped spending time with my family and friends. In about a month, I stopped doing everything that I normally love. I stopped socializing and I would get so angry if anyone disturbed me. I didn't want to go out. I needed to get some water and walked up the stairs. My hand tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I struck the door several times to get whoever locked the door to let me out. I kept hitting it. It wouldn't budge. felt a shiver run up my spine. Someone was standing behind me. I turned to look, and a small child stood behind me. It looked nearly identical to my sister. She was so still, expressionless. The room was so cold. I shook my head and fiddled with the doorknob again. Stay forever, it whispered to me. Stay. You're mine. Stay with me. I kept hitting the door. Where the hell was everybody? The door opened. My mum looked at me confused and asked why I'd been banging on the door. I told her there was a ghost down there, a little girl, and that I didn't want to go down there again. She scoffed and rolled her eyes. My family never really believed anything paranormal like this, and neither did I until it happened to me. I eventually moved out of the basement. I missed having my own personal space and all that extra room. And now I share a room with my little sister, and while she annoys me, I have more energy again, and I'm happier and socializing once more. I'm happy I don't spend all that time with the creepy little ghost. Every so often, when I'm sent down there to get something from the basement, I swear I can see the shadows move. And I can always hear, stay with me. Fortunately, I think she's trapped in the basement. Why do basements always contain such really weird things? He stalked me to my home. Written by Anonymous and narrated by Lady Spookaria. I was 17 when this happened. I'd spent the night at a friend's place and it was still quite warm outside, still summer, so I decided to walk home from the little get-together. There were about 10 of us, each of us carrying on and watching movies. Nothing exciting. I gave everyone a hug and kiss goodnight. I had a can of drink and began to walk home. My house wasn't far. It was just a couple of blocks and the night air was pretty pleasant. The area was known for being pretty safe too. I had forgotten how many times I had walked back home without any issues at all. I said my goodbyes and set off. It was quiet and I was enjoying being out in the fresh night air. A man walked past me. Now, most men are pretty considerate and will try to show that they aren't dangerous. I expected to hear his footsteps. I tried to discreetly look over my shoulder at him. He just stood there, watching me. I felt a shiver go down my spine. I didn't recognize him from anywhere. Immediately I wanted to run home, but I did my best to hide my fears. I doubled my speed, trying and failing to look unbothered by the situation. He changed directions and began to follow me. I fiddled around in my pocket for my phone. The short journey seemed so long and I called one of my friends. "Hey, how are you?" I greeted her brightly, still trying to make it sound like it was a normal conversation. I didn't think at the time that I should call the police or something. I thought if they heard I was talking to someone, he might think twice about actually starting something. Hey, did you leave something here? No, I just wanted to talk. Thing is, I hate talking on the phone. I never call and everyone has to call me first. Even when I do call someone, I give the shortest, most abrupt answers. So, she was pretty suspicious. Are you sure you're okay? He didn't seem to care. I kept walking and he wouldn't stop following me. The pace of his footsteps increased. I walked faster and I knew I shouldn't have gone home, but I wanted to be where I felt safest. I knocked frantically on the door, hoping for one of my parents to open it. He didn't run towards me. He just waited on the path and watched. I could barely see his face. Then I heard footsteps again behind me and my knocking became more intense. When the door finally opened, I practically leapt inside and my dad gave me a confused look. I pointed outside and said that some creep was following me. My dad is a big guy. He's scary but a total teddy bear. But he can be scary though. He opened the door and the guy ran off. Every so often though, especially when I'm home alone, I swear I get a glimpse at him, staring through one of my windows. There was an abandoned house near my grandparents' home. It was a large, two-story home set on a large block with what used to be an enormous rose garden. It also had the oldest tree in town, a landmark, if you will, one with a grim history now. It would have been a sight to behold when it had been maintained. The driveway and front lawn were completely overgrown with weeds. A collection of old, yellow newspapers sat near the front door, piled high. The curtains were stained in what looked to be over 10 years' worth of dust. Long and winding vines coated the walls thickly. The rusted gates were chained to forbid entry, and I'm not sure when the last time they were open was. Probably when 2 local boys went missing, and they were never found. We were always warned not to go near that old house. There were many stories, often conflicting about why the house had been abandoned, and why no one had tried to buy the home. Besides the obvious expense it would take to repair and maintain it. Whenever people would ask about the place, the townspeople would get all quiet. Hushed voices, sideward glances. They would try to avoid the question, and when I discovered the reason, I understood why. However, the teenagers of the community were much more vocal about it. They explained to me the most popular version of the story of what happened. In 1960, there was a happy family that lived there. Pretty standard for the time. Mum, Dad, 3 kids, and some versions say there was a grandmother living there at the time too, but we're not going to include that version. The father was a wealthy businessman, well respected within the community, and the mother was beloved by all. Sure, the small town wasn't much, but if the town had aristocrats, they were it. No business would open without this family present for the party. Every wedding or social event, they were invited. Their children were overachievers, straight-A students, well-mannered, and the kids that parents would often despair when they compared their own failing children to. The type of kids who parents adored having in their class. Every sports team wanted them. Every school group loved them. They were all the town darlings. I think you understand where I'm going with this. So, why would such a perfect family be torn apart? There was a carnival, an annual event to celebrate the founding of the town, or so I think. The true meaning has long been lost, and instead it has become part of the consumer fantasy. People would purchase handmade items, antiques, and I think it is called a flea market or trash and treasure, depending on where you're from. There would be contests with different kinds of food, an incredibly competitive cake baking contest that caused the most friction in the small community. Again, it is a lot more commercial these days. It's lost a lot of the charm. But back then, it was supposed to be so damn good. The family found a small vendor who sold a variety of trinkets. Handmade necklaces, brooches, and bracelets. It was also said that they had a variety of sacred symbols from different cultures. Now, this was the 60s, so people weren't as PC about these sorts of things. The little girl chose what she thought was just a pretty bracelet that she would be able to wear. It looked silver, with a cheap, almost gaudy red stone, set in the middle, surrounded by several shapes. Soon it was purchased, and the girl slipped it on her tiny wrist to take it home. The perfect family continued their trip. They got fairy floss or cotton candy, and spoke to the rest of the townspeople. Everyone was eager to be close to them. However, no one noticed that the red stone had begun to glow, nor that the vendor had mysteriously disappeared. When they got home, they had dinner, meat and 3 veg, and otherwise had an uneventful evening. After the daughter had her bath, she got dressed for bed and went to take the bracelet off. It wouldn't come off. She pulled and struggled with it for a while to try to pull it away. Nothing worked. Eventually, the normally determined child gave up and curled up to sleep. While she slept, the normally happy and peaceful dreams were replaced with screams, burning flames, and hundreds of hands reaching up to try to pull her down with them. In the morning, and at the breakfast table, she told her parents what happened. This did not sound like anything their little girl had spoken about before. The mother and father looked at each other, and then did their best to comfort her, telling her it was just a dream and perhaps she'd been watching too much television. No doubt it was encouraging her to think wicked thoughts, and they decided to restrict how much TV the family watched. She did not like the answers. And went to school where she did not perform as well as she usually does. The teacher noticed the normally bright pupil was distant and did not engage with the material like she usually did. In fact, she turned away when classwork was presented to her, and even had the ill manner to swear at the teacher. Confused, the teacher decided to keep the little girl in after class. Apparently, my grandmother's hairdresser's niece's boyfriend's sister walked past the classroom that day and looked in. She had to hand in some notes or something. The little girl sat in the middle of the classroom at her desk, completely silent. She couldn't see her face. However, the teacher looked frightened and leaned back against her desk. She pointed her finger at the girl. Something felt terribly off. The sister knocked, and whatever happened seemed to come to an end. The teacher went back to normal, except for her hand resting on her chest, gasping for air and breathless. A look of tremendous fright still in her eyes. The little girl said in a clear tone, "May I be excused?" And the teacher agreed. far too quickly. When the little girl walked past her, the friend felt a chill go up her spine, and she noticed the little girl held the bracelet tight in her small hands. So, I imagine even now you're questioning it. Children, even well-behaved ones, do not always behave themselves. And admittedly, that little snippet isn't the most reliable from what I've heard. How about I give you the cold, hard facts of what happened that changed that house? The little girl's behavior gradually began to get even worse. She became violent. At least, not at first. Not outwardly where she would lash out at people or hurt them. Oh no. She would manipulate other people into doing her dirty work for her. Instead of potentially bringing shame to the family, they covered it up to avoid any shame or change to their picture-perfect image. There was one night when screaming was heard by the neighbors. Frantic and blood-curdling screams at 3 a.m. Naturally, this was strange for a town that had not had many, if any, murders or any other forms of crime. The police were called. The father answered the door calmly and invited the officers inside for a cup of tea. Everything felt strange. Yet there were no signs of intruders, nor any damage done to the rest of the family. The officers had a look around, but nothing. Since there did not appear to be an issue, the police left the home and talked on the way back about how strange it was. The next day was Sunday. The dad was mowing the lawn while the mum brought out a nice, cool lemonade for him to drink. Each of them were dressed perfectly. The only sign that there may have been an issue were the exhaustion in their eyes. Keeping up appearances was much, much more important those days. The eldest son of the family was a pinnacle of high school success. Handsome, on the football team, good grades, and naturally incredibly popular with his peers. He had the reputation of being a good lover even. He would one day inherit the family business, but had excellent prospects for college. Now, how did he suffer? Well, it was gradual for him. He started losing his hair due to the stress at home. It is rumored that he managed to get an STD of some kind. Now education wasn't the best back then concerning treatment. Slowly, he began to lose his friends and social circle. Thus, his grades began to suffer. The stress of dealing with his sister's rages back home had reached boiling point. It eventually, and this isn't spoken about much, even these days, and it is always discussed in whispers. You know that old tree I mentioned before? The one out the back of the house? The one that everyone says is the oldest in town? He was found hanging from it. The family grieved, and it seemed only a short while ago their lives were perfect. Now, the middle child. Having been in the shadow of the perfect eldest child and then the adored youngest, you could say he suffered from a little middle child syndrome to begin with. The middle child tried to run away from home, refusing to stay anywhere near his little sister. So this was harder for the parents to conceal from the community. Their public image was now tarnished. The little girl, the youngest child, she was oddly quiet during this whole time. She never smiled again. Except at her eldest brother's funeral. Eventually, the middle child had begun to have violent outbursts, and a new treatment was offered. one that could protect the family's image and hopefully restore them in the public eye. It is viewed with shame now, but they had their middle son lobotomized and institutionalized. Now, back in those days, it would have been good to have a son to carry on the family name and continue the bloodline, but they had to, quote-unquote, make do. Now the parents had to deal with the ill-mannered youngest child, the limbo state of torture for their middle son, and mourn the loss of their eldest son. Both of the perfect parents were understandably beginning to crack under the pressure, and their marriage wasn't turning out so well. Understandably. The pair of them began to drink to excess to block out the pain. And eventually, well, they just stopped caring, you know. The house began to fall into disrepair. The mum stopped taking care of herself, and at one time, no party nor event was complete without them there. Now, everyone avoided having them there. If they saw them at the grocery store, they would walk in the opposite direction or talk behind their hands. It must have been lonely for them to have to deal with it on their own. Some of their close friends did, however, reach out and try, but they were always pushed away. Always. Eventually, all three of them stopped leaving the house altogether. It was grim. Cobwebs coated the walls. Plants grew wildly. Old newspapers practically created a second fort. And finally, the husband, well, the father, had a stroke that impacted half of his face and speech. He lost his job, friends, everything. Later he became a recluse in the garden shed, never leaving, doing his business outside and chasing the locals away from his lawn and property. He became a mockery, and my grandparents sadly admit that they joined in on it. They were part of it as well. As for the wife, well, husband and wife rarely spoke to each other. They were so absorbed in their own pain that they forgot about the other one. The wife died in her chair. Since the husband was no longer speaking to her regularly, her corpse was left to rot. The mangled, twisted corpse rested, a feast for the vermin, and it was many months before the police came to deal with the body. The husband was investigated, no charges brought against him, and there was talk about taking him into care. The family became a warning to everyone. Look what happened if you didn't keep up with your career, or have well-mannered children. People always love when their idols fall. A gunshot. The father shot himself. Blood and gore all over the wooden walls and coated the garden tools. The youngest daughter found him and stood there waiting. People saw her from the road. It is said she didn't blink, didn't move, and simply stood in her father's blood. When the authorities came to deal with the body and take her away, she was gone. Simply vanished without a trace. Years later, the search for her continued, and the worst part is there were sightings of her. It gave people hope, perhaps fueled by guilt or a false hope that maybe they too would be redeemed. Extensive searches began near the home, the local woodland, and anywhere else. She could not be found. Yet the sightings continued. As the people of the town grew older and eventually were replaced by the next generation, the little girl remained the same, and the house fell into further disrepair. The bracelet she wore is frequently seen around town, occasionally left on a picnic table or perhaps at the school. every so often people can see her around town again. Every so often people can see her around town again. She has become an omen of doom, of family breakdown, and the failure of the community to protect its citizens. I saw her yesterday, and I woke up wearing her bracelet. I can't take it off. I hope you enjoy this story, my little spooklings. Every now and then I'll be writing and narrating standalone stories like this one. Feel free to tell me what you think in the comment section down below. Now, don't forget to stab or gently caress the like button. Comment and subscribe if you haven't already. Check out my links below for merch and my Patreon. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you. A Letter to My Murderer. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. I don't think you even knew my name when you stole my life from me. I was faceless. One of many that happened to cross your path late at night, and in your mind, that made us worthy of death. None of the others you have murdered speak to me. I don't know if they can. I tried speaking to one of the other victims, but you must have cut her tongue out. She couldn't remember how to speak. All the others were blindly screaming into the void and were filled with despair. Every Halloween, your death count grows higher, and today is Halloween. I've seen you with your family. The happy family man. A double life. To everyone else, you are the perfect son, a loving husband, a caring father, and a pillar of the community. The perfect mask. It is only your victims who have seen your true face. I remember, I was walking home alone from the baby shower. I wanted some fresh air and always thought the area was a safe one. Everything was going well for me. All my dreams were coming true. The night was peaceful, happy, and you would almost expect there to be some ominous sign of impending doom. There was nothing. I was in such good spirits. You pulled up in your car and asked for directions. To one of the local diners, I think. You seemed so friendly, kind, and even asked how long until I would give birth. I told you, and you were happy for me. You invited me into your car, and I had a feeling something was off, so I declined. You faked a heart attack. When I opened the door to help you, you thanked me. You actually thanked me. And when I got my phone out of my bag to call the ambulance, you threw it on the road and broke it. You yanked me into the car, and I heard a noise, and everything went black. I remember waking up. My head was spinning. As I looked up into the tree canopy, I was slowly being dragged along the forest floor. I could feel the leaves in my fingertips. I remember digging my hands into the soil. The dirt and the mud lifting up. There was a fallen tree log that I gripped tightly onto, and my fingernails slowly peeled off. It didn't take us long to reach your favorite spot. You stripped me of everything that I knew. Everything that I am. anything that I could have been in the future. I did nothing to you. Nothing. I could smell the aroma of rotting flesh, moist dirt, and the smell of ash. I looked over and saw human bones. I felt the knife move through my flesh, and the sudden chill. You didn't even think to kill me quickly. Why? I remember trying to keep my organs inside my body. The fucking cold. The cold on them. You stole my future from me. I tried to hold them in my hands and desperately tried to push them back in. I remember trying to run, wanting to run. I don't know where I am. You did it as slow as possible. I saw the smug look of pleasure in your eyes as you stole my life from me. All my dreams, everything gone. No one has found me yet, and I don't want to stay here. You buried me in a shallow grave, a ditch by the roadside. I can hear the cars drive past, but no one can hear me when I cry out for them. I will never see my parents again. I know they must be worried about me. I know they're looking for me. Occasionally I manage to look through the window at them. They haven't slept properly for weeks. There are boxes of posters. They leap up whenever they hear the phone ring. Occasionally, I manage to tap the glass to get their attention. Sometimes they look, but they can never see me. They can never hear me. I am never going to feel my husband's arms around me again. I was 21 when you stole my life. We were just starting out together. All my hopes and dreams. I will never feel his touch again. Everything we dreamed of together is now gone. I watch him sit in our empty house, crying and pleading for answers. He holds our wedding photo in his hands, and I hope he doesn't try to join me. He has looked at his pistol one too many times for my liking. I can't help him. I can't hear him. I will never move into our first home with him. I will never see him be promoted at work. I will never be able to curl up on the couch with him again. We will never get to hold our child in our arms. It's so cold and I want to go home. To truly go home. Every so often I get a chance to watch you. You bring another body of another dead woman and leave her here with us. There is no pause nor reflection about what you have done. You come and you sit among the graves. Occasionally you fondle a token you stole from us, all to remember us. You don't know our names. You call us by the streets you found us on. You keep bringing more and more women to join us. Some in the pit, some in the grave. Why are you doing this? Please tell me. You knew I was pregnant when you came for me. You cut out my baby. I can still feel you slice the skin and pull it out. A piece is now missing. I couldn't stop you. Why did you do this? Where did you take her? I want her back. You stole my baby from me. And now I've come to claim yours. I'm a priestess of the dead. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. My family have been Christian for many generations now. If you ask us, we will tell you that is the family religion, and I guess I do the same. What we don't tell people is that we have traditions from long, long ago. These sacred rites are done in private, and I can see why they would be. They're strange, and I guess I shut this side of myself off. It isn't exactly something you go to school to tell your friends about. It is what it is. I suppose there are worse family secrets to have. The body is brought to the family funeral home. Seeing bodies like this doesn't bother me anymore. It is a normal part of life to die. Now, it depends on whether they are part of the extended clans or not. If not, they get a pretty standard funeral, with the most basic of rites, but occasionally, something more is required. Usually people who have passed through terrible situations will require some additional treatment. Rites to ensure that the deceased knows to pass on. We bathe the body while prayers are whispered into the corpse's ears. The liquid has been brewed by the elders, and it is a secret that only the wisest of priests know. I don't know the origin, nor do I truly know what I'm saying when I whisper into their ears. Prayers in a language now lost to time. One that is only spoken for the dead and a few of the living get to hear. The muscles of the deceased are massaged before the body is dressed in clothing with sacred symbols sewn into it, ancient and ornate patterns of protection of old. Once the body is prepared, it is taken out into the cemetery. This one has long been abandoned, so we're not likely to have people stumble by and find it. There is no coffin. Not yet, anyway. A fresh grave is dug each time before the grave is lined with salt and petals of strange plants. I can always recognize the rich perfume. It isn't unpleasant. Occasionally when I am outside, I will smell it and instantly think of the rites. The deceased is carried out, covered in a white shroud and decorated by a wreath made from local branches, entwined with flowers and hair of the women in the family. I'm still not entirely sure what the tradition associated with that is. Like most of the mentioned rites, the meaning behind them have been lost. And when I asked my grandma about it, she said it was due to a connection with an ancient deity that has not forgotten about us. I have been doing this since I was 13 years old. I wear a white shift and wait while the body is carefully lowered into the ground. My face will be painted with a mixture of ash and blood. Each line has a meaning, an offer of protection, and a talisman to bind us to the soil if the worst should occur. Instead of the traditional body position, the body is cradled into the fetal one instead, surrounded by a pattern of stones, and the final whispers of funerary prayers can be heard chanted around us, songs of protection, of a new life, and a time to move forward. There is no mention of the horror that will come. The priestess will take a mouthful of a liquid that tastes like rust, ash, and I can smell the alcohol. My head instantly begins to spin when I swallow. The scent alone is enough to knock someone out. Over time you build up a tolerance to it or you die. After that, either myself or another priestess is lowered into the grave. This terrified me the first time. Gazing up at people, and I felt like I was already dead. I'm pretty sure that is the point. You're halfway between the living and the dead. I would lay down and squeeze in behind the deceased, wrap my arms around the corpse, and wait in silence while the rest of the family begin to shovel dirt down on top of me. If I show fear, then the rites are unfavorable. And then, well, perhaps I will tell you what happens to a priestess who fails in her duties. While it happens, I tend to let myself drift off somewhere mentally. I imagine running on the beach or wandering through the forest. anything to touch the living world again. Finally, it goes dark. The grave is relatively shallow, and you need to regulate your breathing carefully. It is lonely in the grave, but even more frightening when you realize that you are not alone. The deceased will whimper and sob, the realization that they are dead and they are in their grave, away from everything they cherished and held dear in their hearts. I would hold them tighter, whisper into their ear that they are not alone, and never will be. You need to be fearless in the face of death, because so many are frightened by it. Most of them will quiet down and will sleep in the earth, content in the prayers, and all you have to do is wait until morning. However, there will be some who are restless, and their spirits will summon the unclaimed dead to them. I don't think many of them realize how or why they are doing this. It is usually the ones who have endured much hardship. These ones give you the most trouble. I don't blame them, and I don't hate them. It simply is. Death rites vary from culture to culture, and I don't think it matters what the tradition actually is. The grieving process is important for the families and the deceased. Both need to move forward and accept the passing for a new life. Now, what happens when the deceased calls out to the unclaimed dead? Hands will reach out through the thick soil and try to pull us into the earth with them. If they cannot have peace, neither can you. Muffled screams, and it can be hard to stay focused. The corpse in your arms will start to shudder, whimper and tremble. You'll feel a change. The body will become stronger, harder to hold in place. You will hear the bones crack as the skull begins to turn backwards to face you. It is dark in the grave, but there is no escaping this menace. The lips draw back in a sadistic grin, proof that the deceased is no longer in residence in the body. The foul breath will cause your stomach to turn and twist. You will feel the threat in every part of your being. It is easy to freeze up or try to escape, but you need to stay focused. The prayers need to continue to be whispered. It is vital that it finishes now and the spirits return back. You will know that it works because the head will crack and return to the rightful position. There'll be a final whimper and it goes to rest. Now, what happens if you fail? You will hear more cracking now. The wrists, the elbows, the shoulders. All of them break and the arms turn around, wrap tightly around you, and then it is too late. I don't know what happens after this. I have heard screaming from the grave before, and it haunts my dreams. In the morning, the pair of them will be dug up, and we will see the corpse with the arms tight around her, nearly suffocating her. And it looks up with its glowing eyes at us. The wicked spirit claimed their sacrifice, mocking us for our failure. She didn't beg to be released, and she knew what was going to come. The priestess is buried alive. Her fate is sealed, and the ground is her tomb. The loss is explained somehow. She went missing and is lost to us. Even though her corpse now resides in the ground with the wicked spirit, it means that the spirit is not able to rise up to torment or harm the rest of the living, so it is considered worth it. A casualty of war. One more spirit is trapped beneath the soil. On to happier things. If the rites were successful, she will wait until sunrise in the grave. The priestess is dug up and helped out, reunited with the living, and rejoices at seeing the sun again. The body is removed from the temporary grave, ready now for traditional rites. The priestess will bathe the corpse blood and dirt from her body with scented rainwater, and will not speak to anyone for 3 days or nights. In solitude, a chance for her to rest and regain her strength after the encounter. I tend to sit alone during these times and piece things together. Each time my memory gets worse, and I think it has to do with the drink we are offered at the start of each ritual. There are always several priestesses within each clan, each of us alternating between caring for the dead, cleaning the bodies, making our mixtures, and teaching. I received a message earlier today, so I guess there will be a body to care for. I can't say that I enjoy it, but I've gotten used to it. Only once I have heard the bones snap and crack beneath the ground. I recognize some of the voices when they whisper to me. Every single time they got closer, and they have become more demanding. I'm Scared of Halloween. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. Have you ever lived in a house for years with absolutely no problems at all? Then suddenly things begin to happen and you wonder what you did to upset the ghosts in your house. I've lived in this house with my mum, dad, 3 sisters, and my grandpa after my grandma passed away. My house has been haunted for as long as I can remember. Occasionally you would see spirits standing at the foot of your bed, watching you. I would even say that the spirits were protective of us. When there was a fire, they alerted us to let us know it was time to escape. I felt a chill, cold hand on my cheek during the night. I awoke with a fright to see a semi-transparent girl beside me. She pointed to the door, whispered, "Fire." The smoke filled the hallway and we ran outside, managing to escape. I looked up to my bedroom window and saw her staring down at us, a somber expression on her tiny face. There were 2 other ghosts that resided in the house with us. An elderly gentleman. He hated loud music and always expected us to behave like ladies. So he would throw the odd book at us when we swore or got really angry if we brought a boy home. He liked to hang out in the study. Never spoke much though. Then there was a middle-aged woman. I think she was a maid a long time ago. If something is in the wrong place, it will go missing before appearing in the right one. The spirits have always been helpful towards us. Almost part of the family. It changed when Halloween rolled around last year. There were the usual trick-or-treaters. We'd open the door and admire their costumes, give them some candy, and watch a scary movie or 2. There was a strange woman who came to the door. She only knocked once. There was an instant change in the air. A chill, cold dread over the entire house. On the doorstep was a woman garbed in Victorian attire, pale as the moon, and we could not see her eyes. Her lips were stained red, and she smiled. We stared at her in confusion, before my sister murmured a small, "Hello?" "May I come in?" she asked. Her voice was smooth and alluring. We both were eagerly about to grant her permission when the door was forced shut, locked, and outside we heard a loud, mocking laugh. When I looked through the peephole, she was gone. After that, the spirits became restless and angry. Each of us began having nightmares at night. And the ghosts, they became sadistic towards us. They would scratch us, wake us up, bite us, whisper at us that they want to kill us. And one time, I was in the library doing homework. The old man's hands went around my neck. I was frozen, unable to move. I felt his hands tighten around my throat. My breath became sharp. In the reflection, I could see his slender arms and bearded face. Before, all the ghosts always looked more human, their faces kinder. This time, he looked skeletal, demonic, and his eyes glowed orange. He leaned down to whisper in my ear. Run before Halloween. She will be back. He whispered, a hint of desperation and fear in his voice. Briefly, his old expression returned before he disappeared. How did this woman turn the ghost against the rest of the family? How? I asked. He looked as though he was about to speak. The words caught in his tongue before he vanished. There was a pause. I looked down at my phone. It was the 30th of October, the day before Halloween. Again, I felt eyes on me. A vase crashed against the wall, broke and shattered on the floor into pieces. I heard screams in the distance. I pushed back my chair, ran towards the room, and saw my sister pinned, the little girl's hands around her throat. I ran towards them to try to pry them apart when I saw them whispering to each other. The little girl disappeared. My sister fell to the floor with a loud bang. She looked like a fallen doll and slumped forward. She clutched her ears, sobbed, and her small body shook violently with each passing sob. My arms instantly went around her shoulders. All she murmured was a soft, She told me to leave. It continued to raise more questions than answers. The maid had attacked my mother and she refused to speak a word about it. Every ghost demanded we leave, but why? One morning I was in the kitchen washing dishes when a foul odor hit me. I coughed and gagged, clutched my mouth and ran outside to get some fresh air. I wanted to move, to leave, but we had nowhere else to go. I noticed the door to the crawl space under the house was open. Normally it was locked to protect the local dogs, cats, or possums from going inside. I was drawn to the space, and I had to crawl through the maze. There were cobwebs sticking to my hair, and I had to keep an eye out for spiders. There was a wooden box, old and covered in a thick layer of dust. I struggled to open it as it had rusted over. Unsure of what to do, I dragged it outside into the sunlight before prying it open with a crack. Inside were old black and white photos. They'd been preserved. However, there were signs of water damage. The first image was the maid. She'd been standing to one side, but I could clearly make out her features. I flipped it over. It spoke about a woman with a scratched out face in the picture. The next one was the old man. I recognized him clearly, as he was the ghost I spent the most time with, and flipped it over. It had his name. John Carpenter, his birthday and the date he passed away. Otherwise, it was quite uneventful. The final picture was a little girl with a doll in her arms. The same girl I saw regularly. I placed the photographs beside me and rummaged through the box. There was an old journal. I nearly missed it, but there was one final photograph. It was the woman who arrived on Halloween a year ago. She hadn't aged. She hadn't changed. Even the photograph alone gave me an uncertain feeling in my stomach, as though she was looking at me through the photograph. I gulped, turned it over and opened the journal. The handwriting was cursive, chaotic and beautiful at the same time. I skipped to the final page and figured it would have the answers I craved. The final page was dated the 31st of October, 1891. It worked. It cost me in blood. My father, daughter, and maid are dead. I can feel it. I have become immortal through him. I have to return to this place on All Hallows Eve to renew the ritual. My eyes widened at this. The ghost had never spoken about how or why they died. I kept reading. With each new family, my power will grow stronger and stronger. I will be the terror in the world. I bound their souls to the house, and they tried to fight me. Every year they weakened my wishes. They become weaker, and I become stronger. What the hell? I dropped the book and shook my head. I believed in ghosts. I knew them. I had to get my family out of the house. As I stood up, I murmured to myself how I was going to explain this to the ghosts and see if they had any answers for me. I took the box with all the items I needed. I ran back inside the house. I know what happened. I know who she is. How can I help you? You don't need to do this, I called out to the empty walls. I received no answer in response. Please, listen to me. Again, more silence. I couldn't feel them anywhere. I reached out with my hand and walked down the hallway. Anything to try to find where they were. It was getting dark outside. The house was becoming chilly. The kind where your bones would ache and burn. The lights faded and the normally bright house was grey. Outside, I could hear the trick-or-treaters begin their passage. I knew what I had to do. I had to get my family out of my house. I kept walking around and began to cough. It was only then that I saw them outside peering through the window, holding each other and sobbing. I tried to open the front door. It felt as though it was dead-bolted and I choked. I hit the doors and the windows, crying out for them to help me. I had to break a window to get out. I ran towards the dining room. My hands tightly gripped a chair, lifted it up into the air, and it was caught. I turned to see the woman from before, the murderess. Her clawed hand went around my throat, squeezed tightly, and I felt the world disappear. I was in a dreamless sleep. A dream. Thank fuck it was just a dream. I woke up curled up on the floor. Around me were boxes of my family's property. The furniture had been wrapped up, and I awkwardly stood up. There was a sign outside the front of my house. Hello? Hello? Mom? Where is... I felt arms wrap around my waist and looked down to see a familiar face. It was the little girl. She looked... human. All the demonic signs were gone. Hi. You're one of us now. You're not going to leave now. One of us? I questioned, and looked down at her face, shaking my head. The realization of what that meant sank in. It meant I was dead. Mom? Where are you? It was a long time for you. You woke up later, and they're moving out now. I couldn't be dead. Then I remembered the smoke and her hand around my neck. I remembered life leaving my body. I found the journal again, and it said, I have added another to my collection, and I will only grow stronger. Keep the Hunger at Bay. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. She awoke with a start, breathless and with the tire iron ready to strike. there was nothing there. The nightmare never seemed to come to an end. Always. Every night the same event would replay again and again. She would never be able to forget. Her mind would replay the image of her children devouring their father, all while she watched helplessly. His eyes would lock on hers, lips moving, unable to speak his final words. And the sight of her children now finished, wandering into the night with their devouring mouths, demanding hands, and a hunger that would never end. Every night had been the same, if she managed to sleep at all. She didn't know how she managed to survive until morning. How often she thought this is countless now. There was still a chill in the early morning air as the sun rose, as though the world continued to move forward despite the chaos. She pulled her jacket tightly around her. It was still stained with the blood of the previous owner, yet now was no time to be squeamish. Necessity demanded the use of anything available. She blinked, wiped the sleep from her eyes, yawned, and lifted up the trusty tire iron again. She always made sure she had a weapon. It also served as a convenient tool throughout the zombie apocalypse. Silently, she peeked down the ladder down the treehouse for any sign of the undead. There was nothing. Her watch was still going, but her phone had died long ago, and had been discarded to make room for supplies. It was hard to say how long it had been. Given the way the world around her had begun to break down, she'd always assumed it had been a month, maybe 2 at the most. No, it had to be longer, given the state everything was in. Sometimes, she wondered whether the lack of human contact had begun to impact her ability to tell the time. Newspapers and magazines were now a glimpse into an alien past, and one she no longer felt she was any part of to begin with. That world was dead, and anyway, magazines and newspapers were now used to start fires. While it was quiet, she gathered up her well-worn backpack, tightened her jacket around her again, and began climbing down, only stopping to reach up for the tire iron. She opened up her well-worn map. It had frayed edges, was worn down in places, and was stained in sweat and blood. Her fingertip trailed along the roads. Slowly and surely she was making her way out of the suburbs. It was worth a shot. 3 things were vital: safety, food, water. Her need to get out of the suburbs was based on supplies becoming harder to find. Every house on the street she resided in had been picked clean. All the shelves were empty, and she didn't dare to open the fridge. As she made her way down to the local corner store, she thought about how essential things had become rare, risky, and ever so valuable. Far more than they had been in the world before. She followed the fence line and immediately stopped when she heard the sounds of yelling in the distance. Any sound could potentially attract the undead. She peeked through a hole in the fence to see 2 people fighting. Other humans posed a threat, just as much, if not more, than the undead themselves. Silently, she watched them. Each of them were desperate, hungry and wanting to survive. Their faces were gaunt due to starvation, their clothing torn and badly maintained. The older man pulled out a pistol and fired it at the other man, who fell backwards, clutched his belly and held his stomach. The shooter seemed to apologize, saying he wasn't like this. This wasn't like him, before grabbing the tin cans of food and fleeing the scene. She hid to make sure he couldn't see her, and she was about to flee herself when the sobs of the wounded man had begun to attract the shambling dead. She knew she should kill him to end his suffering and not allow him to join their ranks. However, that would mean risking her own safety. A zombie of what had once been a woman with her stained, tattered dress rambled forward, with her arms outstretched and ravenous mouth open, drooling a black, sticky blood and the flesh of her previous victim still clinging to her yellow teeth. When the man saw her, he began to crawl backwards to escape and was entirely focused on her. She wasn't the only zombie to begin circling him, arms outstretched and hungry for his fresh meat. There were 4 others, an old man and 2 children. She wanted to do something. It did not take long before blood loss and fear took hold of the wounded man. His screams could be heard ringing out through the alleyways for any chance, any hope of assistance that could come to him. The dead ripped into his skin and pulled, breaking bone, sinking their mouths into his still living flesh as they began their feast. There was nothing more she could do. It wasn't the first time she sat back and let someone else die. She backed away from the fence and continued on her path through the backyards. There were signs of old habitation, broken and weathered toys, overgrown plants, and signs that they had tried to survive in the new world. Defenses, makeshift devices to gather and store water. She filled up one of her water bottles with water. It was filthy. The water was brown. This source of water was beginning to dry out. She tapped the side, and sealed the bottle. It would need to be boiled and treated later. She continued her way, and saw, written in paint on the wall, were the markings of someone writing down the days. The wall was completely covered. It had been far more than she thought. When was the last time she spoke to someone, anyone, without worrying that they were going to try to kill her? Occasionally, she would see signs of devoured pets, or animals who desperately try to protect their owners from the undead, or perhaps their owners had gotten too hungry. Chewed and cooked bones were a frequent sight, and many dogs had become vicious, savage, feral, and waiting to attack humans for a chance of a meal. Thus far, she hadn't seen any zombie dogs or any other mutated animals. A blessing, at least. She stopped dead in her tracks when she heard growling, the telltale warning of someone about to attack. It didn't sound like the typical undead growl. She looked into a cage and saw a chained German shepherd snarling at an approaching zombie child. The zombie hadn't seen her yet. Perhaps it was a longing for companionship, guilt, or a hidden sense of judgment. She lifted the tire iron and brought it down the zombie child's head. The dried, blackened blood squirted upwards and the undead fell limp to the ground. The dog was backed up between the doghouse and the nearby fence. It was darker than the others, surprisingly in healthy condition, and stained with dried blood. Clearly not the canines. Its back was arched, teeth bared, but defensive rather than hostile. A part of her debated killing the dog humanely. But... Hey! Hey! Shh! Shh! It's okay. The dog growled louder in response. No, she said, lowered the bloody tire iron to a resting position. But she was still uneasy about dropping it altogether. She rummaged around in her pocket, the remnant of an energy bar she found, and showed the dog before tossing it over. Her stomach growled heavily at the sight. She didn't know when her next meal was going to come. The dog sniffed at it and gobbled it up, hungry, and she watched, briefly regretting the loss of food. It could have been the last bit of food she would have for a long time. She opened her bottle of water, poured some into the incredibly dry dog bowl, and waited for the dog to drink. It didn't take long. It approached and lapped up as much water as it could. Timidly, she extended her hand and let the dog sniff it. A part of her imagined the teeth sinking into her hand. However, it licked her hand and she breathed a sigh of relief. Okay, I'm gonna let you go, okay? I'm sorry, I just can't look after you. The dog stared up at her, listened to her words and tilted its head to the side. Both woman and beast turned when they thought they heard a stick break. There was nothing there. No signs of further movement. There was a disturbing and telltale aroma that filled the area. Death hung in the air. There are remains of human bones with rotting flesh and torn clothing nearby. The bones had become bleached in the sunlight, and they showed signs that they had been gnawed on by the hungry dog. Considering the fate of the world, she had no doubts that the dog had eaten them to survive. And, to be fair, so had she. Her eyes met the dog once more. I can barely feed myself, and I'm sorry. You need someone who can make sure he can get food and be cared for. It wouldn't be fair for you to come with me. I'm sorry. I'd like to take you with me, though. The truth is, I could do with the company, she said, unhooked the heavy chain and let it fall to the ground with a thud. She felt the dog's fur around the neck where the collar had dug into its skin, loosened it and let it drop to the ground. It was oddly silent. She made an impulsive decision. Hey, come, but you need to listen to me. No randomly barking, no running off, she said, ruffled the dog's neck and smiled. A brief remainder of humanity returned to her, and she gestured for the dog to follow her. It was strange. She couldn't understand why the dog was still so well fed. Shouldn't it have starved or been eaten a long time ago? She thought to herself. However, the pair made their way to the treehouse, their home away from home. With a groan, she managed to lift the dog up. It didn't help her, and she didn't want to name it. The company had been pleasant. She set up a makeshift spike trap to ensure any zombies would be trapped, and give her some time to dispatch them. With her hand resting on the dog, she pulled out the well-worn map and looked down the road. With any luck, it wouldn't take long, but it meant she would need to go down the highway. She wasted no time and walked along the highway road. There were multiple cars. Some had been burnt out or showed signs of car crashes when the world fell apart. Every so often, she would peek inside the car windows to see if she could find any supplies. Sometimes she got lucky and found some water, an energy drink, or some more tinned goods. Spam, The questionable meat sauce that she'd once turned her nose up was a treat, and she'd share it with her canine companion. Alright, we're going out to the farmland. I figure there'll be fewer people there for us to worry about, she began, ruffling the dog's fur. It didn't feel weird to talk anymore. She figured the rural areas would be safer, with fewer people. The dog trotted alongside her. Briefly, she imagined herself as Nora with her faithful companion Dogmeat at her side from the Fallout franchise. The pair of them would take on the apocalypse together. It would be the first time she was away from her treehouse in quite some time. Together, the pair continued into the night. However, she did not see that she was being watched, nor that she'd been tracked for some time now. He had been tracking her for months, watching her since her family had been destroyed and kept to the shadows. He stared at her in confusion, pity, and a hint of remorse. He doubted she would recognize him now. He barely did. Why was she spending so much time talking to herself? There was no dog. At least, none that was alive. I hope you enjoyed that, my little spooklings. It is a continuation from a zombie story I wrote before, and let me know if you want part 3. Don't forget to stab the like button if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you haven't already, and check out my social media. This video was made with the support of my patrons. If you wish to become one, the link is in the description below. Check out this voodoo doll I commissioned from Fleshwad. Isn't it cute? Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you. I love Jeremy. Valentine's Day has always been my favorite day. Well, except for my wedding day when Jeremy and I married over 8 years ago now. It was a beautiful but small ceremony, attended by family and friends. It was such a beautiful day. The gown I wore shone brightly in the sunlight, and I was the happiest I had ever been in my life. Every day was a blessing, and I did not know how truly lucky I was. Unfortunately, you never know at the time. Blessed is a word I would use to describe myself back then. But ever since Jeremy fell ill, things have changed. I have been the one who organizes everything for us. I cook the Valentine's Day dinner. His favorite, naturally, lasagna. I would set the table, organize our outings, but it was all worth it to see the smile on his face. His face would light up. We would eat, and although since he has fallen ill, he doesn't eat much these days. He also doesn't come out to spend time with me like the old days. Instead, I push him around using the wheelchair around the garden. I hate how he can't tell me what he thinks of the flowers and the birds. I know he still loves me. He tells me all the time. It isn't easy being a caretaker for him. It is what you do for love. It doesn't bother me when at times. He can smell pretty bad, but he can't help it. He's lost so much weight. He's wasted away. I affectionately call him my bag of bones. My family keep telling me that it is time for me to move on from Jeremy. I will never let him go. Jeremy is mine and I am his. Forever. It doesn't matter to me. None of it. The fact he died years ago. I dug him up so we can be together forever. It took a long time and people never understand. I have to keep him hidden in the house. I know they will try to take him from me. I will always keep him by my side. I hold him as I fall asleep every night. We are married and in love. Death changes nothing. Jeremy belongs to me, and I belong to him. Mask of Love. Every Valentine's Day, I am reminded that all men are sexist jerks. They remind me of that dickhead Tony who broke my heart when I was 15. It doesn't matter that I'm a lot older now. That fucking bastard. I was able to have my revenge on him. I slowly cut off the face I had loved so much. I keep it with me always. I didn't care that he had a girlfriend. We were meant to be. I just had to show him what he needed. I know what he needed, and every so often it isn't enough to keep me satisfied. I need more. And I go out on the hunt. When I am like this, it doesn't matter who the person is, because I always hear Tony's words coming through, and I can relive those final moments again and again. The hardest part is finding the right person. He has to fit. He has to be perfect. He has to be white, 5'10" to 6 foot, no one shorter, athletic build, and with the right face. He doesn't need the clothes at first, but don't worry, I have Tony's old clothes. I'll make it work. I always do. They might be a little bloodstained, but they're still good. I make sure they are wearing the clothes, and I cut their hair if I need to, and I always keep some as a souvenir, because there is nothing like a little keepsake. He needs to stick to the script, or I get angry. He has to choose to do it. I'm not a monster, you know. He has to choose it. So I lock him in a cage, naked, with Tony's old clothes. He is, well, usually the new Tony is told to put the clothes on, and most of them do. A little blood here and there has never hurt anyone. I tell them to sit across me at the dinner table, and they need to tell me how much They love me. I cheat a little. I even leave Tony a note to help him, you know, to tell him the things he's supposed to say. I will start by asking him if he loves me, and they're usually so overwhelmed with love at this point that they start crying, and everyone needs a pointer and a little hand now and then, so I place a knife or maybe a gun on the table. And they tell me they love me, and they follow the scripts and tell me that they want to marry me. I make them wear the mask I made of Tony's skin just to make it real. It's finally happening. I'm so happy. Tony finally loves me. We will live out our dreams together. But they always do something wrong. They're so selfish. Why do they want to get away from me? I have to kill them. Oh, they're so mean to me. Maybe this year, all I want is my Tony. And this year, I'm gonna get my Tony. This video was made with the support of my Patreons. So, which story was your favorite? The links to the original stories can be found in the description below. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.